everyone, it's Josh, and it's another Monday interview. Mike Isaac is a longtime technology writer and has been a technology correspondent at the New York Times since June 2014. During that time, he's covered a variety of technology companies, including OpenAI, SpaceX, Anthropic, Apple, and Uber, which he published a book about in 2019 called Super Pumped: The Battle for Uber. But the bulk of his recent reporting has been about Meta, the company that owns Facebook. So last week, I interviewed Mike about what exactly is going on over there, what prompted them to make such a big bet on a VR metaverse, and what, from wearable smart glasses to prediction markets, we can expect Mark Zuckerberg to do next. Hope you enjoy. Mike, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with me today.
Thank you for having me. Sorry it took me this long to get on here, but you dealt with my scheduling.
Happy to have you no matter what. We did an episode, at this point, I think it was like a month and a half or so ago, about Meta Horizon Worlds and the metaverse as a concept and how that concept cost the company Meta $80 billion. Mm-hmm. We are now at the point where Meta is trying to figure out what they are going to do for their business next. And I wanted to have you on because you have, for a long time, reported on this specific company for the New York Times. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of it, how long have you been working on this subject as a reporter? And what are the sort of big things you've noticed in your coverage that maybe make this company, Meta, different from the other ones?
Yeah, so I'm out in San Francisco, Oakland, and been out here since 2004, but I started covering tech in 2010. And really jumped around a few different outlets, but basically had been covering Facebook and Twitter, really, and kind of social media, kind of still back in the era where it was like this question of, is it going to be the next MySpace, right? Like, depending on how old you are, I don't know how old everyone in your audience is, but I'm 41, so I've been around with that first era of, you had AOL dial-up internet, you had instant messenger, you had MySpace, where the question was, because MySpace kind of died, everyone was like, is this just a fad, you know?
Were you a MySpace kid back in the day?
I was. I'm praying to God no one can find my old profile. I had I had hair. I had like emo haircut, I think.
Sweet.
Good Lord. But I think, to your question of like what I've noticed is like Facebook and Zuckerberg have been different in, I would argue, evading some of the pitfalls that like other companies have gone down, whether it's, like figuring out how to hook themselves into the bones of the internet in a lot of ways, basically from the bottom level, like Facebook as an app. And before it was an app, it was a desktop site. That's how they kind of got hooked in everywhere. It's very much hard to, I guess what I would say is it's hard for them to die in the traditional sense that we think of a company like backs up and goes out of business, which is why later on, as they've gone down some different holes, I don't think it's necessarily lights out for them forever. But yeah, I think like the biggest thing is they have a lasting power that is not common among many Silicon Valley companies, is what I'd say.
And I think that's an interesting point about how they contribute to the architecture of what we consider the modern internet to be.
Totally.
Because they managed to be in the right place at the right time, release a whole bunch of open standards that a lot of other people, a lot of other companies, a lot of other developers immediately signed on to, and they were able to sort of reshape the web in their own image during Web 2.0.
Yep. No, I mean, I'm glad you get into the nuts and bolts of that, because I really think that this is like, look, I have a lot of criticisms of Zuckerberg and the management team over there, but I do think they're pretty astute students of like tech and business history and study how different companies from like Linux and open source sort of like software standards back in the day managed to win out against some other types of software or companies that were building things that ended up seeming to have like a real strong, moat or defense around them, and their margins were really high, and then quickly sort of had the ground underneath them eroded. And exactly to your point, they built PyTorch, which is like this like very widely used, I believe, standard. They've done a lot of moves around the web of yesteryear, and then like certain development tools that I think have been pretty smart, if that makes sense.
What are the tools that Facebook developed that have become standards?
Yeah, so I think PyTorch is probably the one that they get the most credit for. They had this guy there. He had created this, essentially free software that a lot of developers in the AI field, or in like just sort of like folks who are building what kind of became a bottom-ish layer, or bottom to middle layer of the internet, ended up using. And like, I think this, as well as like a few open source hardware projects, they have like, I forgot the exact name, but it's kind of like a foundation where they're like, here, we're open sourcing a lot of our models for how we build routers, I want to say, or different like data center type things. Like before it got way competitive. And the philosophy, I think, is sound, which is, and they can afford to do this because they print money in their ads business, but like give away as many tools as we can in order to get people hooked on them, and then that builds into how we last. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, I think another great example of that would, of course, be internet.org, or later Facebook Free Basics, where they're like, oh yeah, we'll provide free internet to people in India. But of course, the catch is that you get access to maybe not quite the entire internet, and you definitely get a lot more Facebook on your internet than anything else.
God, man, internet.org feels so long ago, but you're exactly right. It was a huge moment for them. And they were also, Zuckerberg was like realizing, we've conquered or we've taken over a lot of the developed world, the US and Canada, like our businesses where our ad dollars are really, the margins are much higher and the average revenue per user is much higher. But like, there are limits to that, so they got to go everywhere. Where can they? And India is one of the most populous countries, the most populous country.
It is now, yeah.
Yeah. So, that's essentially, okay, this is obviously where we go next. And that's the sort of bargain that they make. We want to give it everywhere. They ended up running into some real strong, they failed ultimately in that because, their government under Modi and stuff was like, this is probably not smart for us to let Westerners kind of control the internet. But it was a sound theory in terms of like, conquest and sort of digital colonialism, if you want to call it that, and it just didn't work out for them. But you're exactly right. They're just like, here, we give away internet, but the internet is Facebook, basically.
Well, and to the point of things that they tried to build new frontiers on, I think this is a great time to pivot into talking about the metaverse, or at least Meta's conception of the metaverse.
Good distinction.
If you had to sum up why Mark Zuckerberg invested so much time and resource into this thing, what would you say?
I would argue it boils down to his real insecurity of not owning the ground beneath his feet. And by that, I mean platform, this is going to get nerdy, but like platform risk, right? Ultimately, Facebook is an app built atop someone else's real estate. Their most popular apps are still Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. Those are iOS and Android apps, basically. Like the desktop is no longer, I mean, like it's a meaningful revenue source for them materially, but is clearly not the primary driver. And Mark found out very quickly in a world in which the world was rapidly changing from desktop, internet access to mobile devices, that he no longer controlled that experience. He went from browsers, which again, he didn't own the browser, but he still had way more control inside of a browser, to the app environment, which is just you play by Apple's rules, you play by Google's rules. And over the years, Apple got increasingly restrictive on what you were allowed to do. So ultimately, what is the thing he's been searching for? What is the next frontier? What is the next platform? And through sheer force of will on his behalf, he said, this is my this is my bet, but also really just what he wanted. He wanted this.
Well, that's another question that I have, right? Is why was this his bet? We talked a little bit in our episode about Oculus, Paul Merlucky, the way that Paul Merlucky was kind of the hot whiz kid for a little bit. I have to assume there was a level of professional envy there from Mark Zuckerberg. But it also does seem that he really, truly thought that VR was imminent as the next big thing. Why?
Mark, I think, is one of those people who actually, he kind of lacks focus in ways, but also the person who put this in front of him was Mark Andreessen, who invested, one of his partners invested in Oculus.
Yeah, he got a very healthy exit when Oculus was acquired by Facebook, if I recall correctly.
That's right. That's exactly right. I want to say they paid $4 billion for Oculus, and Andreessen was like the main or primary, let's say, investor. And Andreessen is on the board of Facebook. There's folks who are like, are you self-dealing? And da 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 da. But Andreessen, who, if you don't follow him, approaches everything like with the world is on fire and is a zealot and is like fully convinced of whatever is the next thing, comes to Zuckerberg and says, look, this is huge. You got to try this platform. And Zuckerberg, I remember this too, because it was like 2012 and I had tried the Oculus at a tech conference. Actually, Shane Smith was there of Vice and was also putting it on. It was really weird. It was like a cool thing, like, oh, this is interesting. Like, oh, it's crazy. Like, you have this immersive VR thing. It was definitely more sophisticated than past iterations of it had been. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. But also you felt nauseous. Like, I couldn't do it for more than 15 minutes. Like, and like the limitations were there. But Zuckerberg, I think, was just, I imagine part of it was wanting so badly to believe that this was the next thing because he could like sort of acquire it and then sort of pour a bunch of money into it and fuel the fire to kind of make it the next thing. I think the flaw, I would say, in that thesis is like, he wasn't chasing user behavior. He was sort of trying to prognosticate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sort of feels like almost magical thinking, where it's like, if enough people get on board with this thing, it will be the thing. But
totally.
Time and time again, they ran up against the limitations of technology and physics, frankly, that there are certain things that we are simply not capable of doing in electronics, and there are other things that we will probably never be capable of doing. And for some reason, they, at least from my perspective, just felt so passionate about this that they truly believed that they could defy the force of gravity itself.
I really like that you say physics, because that's what I kept whenever in every interview. I was like, they have this thing that where the momentum of, they look at like, oh, Moore's law tells us like scaling is gonna like get us like, you know, a couple of years from now.
We talked about this on the show. Like, Moore's law is not a law. It is a projection that people have been following, and now transistors can't really get any smaller.
Exactly. But they latch onto it as like gospel and say, it's never a where we are now. It's where I know we're going to be 5 to 10 years from now. And they have the conviction of people who, I mean, it's almost like religious sort of level of conviction of like, this is going to happen. I was just thinking back on the interviews over those years. You could never really talk to them about what is capable now, or like the numbers of people who are using or buying these devices now, which were low and continue to be low for a long time, because it was always, well, if we put enough money or seed the ecosystem with enough games, like any platform, it's a chicken and egg problem. So they always wanted to try to like prop it up on both sides, whether it's apps or people. But it was just, it never was there, you know?
Well, a question I have for you about that is, you were very much on the ground during all of the attempts for this to become a thing.
Yep.
What were you seeing in terms of people's thoughts, opinions. To what extent do you think that they were just trying to project an image of confidence versus to what extent were they true believers in the vision? Because I feel like with stuff like this, it's always a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. But I'm curious what you were seeing and feeling.
I mean, look, I've lived in the Bay Area since 2004. And so this is definitely like the locus of people who enjoy new technology for the sake of it, right? I respect the idea of people who are sort of pushing boundaries on things that are improvements to how tech works with a specific purpose in mind, right? Like I'm not a Luddite in the sense that I think all tech is bad. I think there's a lot of things that it can be used for good. I think largely in the realm of science and drug research and things like that. But I think in general, the attitude out here is look what I can do and look how I can push this forward and like see what we can do because we can. And so a lot of those people were pouring into VR, AR research because they were genuinely interested in it. And Meta, once Zuckerberg sort of made this a priority, was recruiting a lot of those folks. But then I would say that is a vocal minority of people who, in general, Meta was also willing to lose a lot of money plowing cash into this. And so they hired entire divisions for marketing. They hired, partnerships people to convince Disney they needed a chief metaverse officer or whatever, it became a whole industry of folks who were, there was like a vocal minority of people who really loved and believed in the tech and were like true believers. And then a much larger majority of people who were like, well, I'm told this is where it's going. And also I need a job and this is what we're going to do. So let's do it,
That's something that I always find so interesting is you have these narratives that spin up. And the narratives, of course, are driven by the tech companies because they want to frame whatever it is that they are working on as an inevitability.
Yes.
To use a contemporary example, the sheer number of times that I've heard that, well, AI is the future, it's going to change the way that you work. It is, I promise. And therefore, you need to figure out how to incorporate it into your workflow, as opposed to, well, what is this technology actually doing? And is it useful for me in any way, shape, or form whatsoever? And these narratives are then able to drive this hype cycle that sometimes are able to bring people on board and sometimes are not. I think, though, that something that the metaverse thing had in common with the other prevailing hype trend of the time, which is Web3, is that both of them had a pretty high barrier to entry. In the case of VR, it was the headset, which is a huge fucking pain in the ass to wear for a lot of people. Right. On the Web3 side, it was technical knowledge and, of course, money, because actually investing in any of that was so expensive. And I remember I was in 2020, 2021, actually working for a tech company and seeing a lot of this stuff happen in real time, where it was like, well, how could we potentially integrate metaverse into our product, integrate crypto into our product? And now that we're sitting where we are now, which is to say that bubble has burst a long time ago, and some of it's still around, particularly on the crypto side, but it's obviously not the wave of the future. I'm wondering what you have seen from that experience or learned from that experience that you can apply to what's happening right now and going forward.
I have to constantly, I'm just as susceptible when everyone out here is like, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Like, I have to be like, is this going to happen? Like, maybe it is going to happen.
Yeah, and see, this is why I live in New York, is because I can't.
I no, and that's the thing. Like, if you're out here, it's just sort of, it's crazy how much of a take for granted X thing is going to happen just as on the street. And there was a moment, I remember this specifically in the context of crypto and then later metaverse. But for me, I wrote this story about, all these people inside of Meta and Google or whatever, like leaving to start crypto companies because like there was much more upside in raising a bunch of money, easy money to build a crypto company compared to doing it for Meta or Google. And I was sort of like, yeah, this is coming, da, 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 da. And then some guy in my mentions was like, what is a good use case for crypto?
Right.
And I had to like stop and I was like, well, like how are people using it? Like what beyond, let's say, money transfers or whatever, which is already a thing that exists, like I'm still trying to figure out how it would be more efficient to use Bitcoin for money transfers, even though it costs a shitload of money to do that. And I couldn't come up with anything. And so this idea that I think this thing has really returned to me in my reporting and my career is as North Star is just like humans have agency. We have the ability to make decisions on what we want the world to look like and what we want our lives to look like. And so whenever someone just gets on their soapbox and starts saying, this is what's happening and you better get on the train or not, I immediately recoil. And I think crypto and the metaverse it's not a one-to-one to AI now because AI is not a new discipline by any stretch, right? And you know this, you're a technologist, so you know that, like, artificial intelligence has been around for decades in some form or another, and it's also a very bad catch-all term because it means a lot of different things in different contexts.
Yeah, but if we're talking about predictive text modeling, that's been around forever.
100%. So, like, I think it's more what forms is it going to take? What are we comfortable with? And how do we want to, have that exist in our world or not, And so, as I was talking about before, like, I think there are forms of, let's say, cancer research or drug. I think AlphaFold is like a worthwhile project that Google is doing, Like, I think things like where you can model predicted behavior in drug research or cancer trials is actually very interesting if you actually test that. But I think we should have real questions on what that should look like on other parts of the world and how humans should or should not intervene. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I want to get back to the bigger conversation about like frontier models and machine learning in a little bit. But for now, I want to pull it back to the metaverse again because, one of the things that I noticed was how much of this seemed to just be a scramble for speculative value. Yeah. This was most overt in the case of out and out real estate schemes, basically. Yeah. Of course, there was shit like Decentraland and those models of metaverses where it's like, well, here's all this digital land. You better come get more land in Atlas Earth or whatever because you don't want to miss the train. Mark, on the other hand, I think he understood that there could be some value in that. But the major value was, as you had been saying at the beginning, sort of getting the standards, the tools in place so that he could own the land under his feet. And then, of course, lease that land out to everybody else who wanted to use his technology. But of course, it didn't work out that way. On March 18th of this year, Meta announced that it would be shutting down Horizon Worlds in VR. In June, and they ended up partially backtracking on that, but they did most of it. They sunset the vast majority of Horizon as a platform, including Horizon Workrooms and Spark AR, which was their toolkit for building 3D objects in mixed reality environments. Yep. Also on May 19, and you reported this, Meta laid off 8,000 employees company-wide. And this was making good on a plan that they had announced in April. And your reporting noted that these cuts were actually first rumored to hit Reality Labs back in January. And that is a unit that is a top-level unit in Facebook. It sits adjacent to platform under the Meta banner and has now lost $80 billion. So my question for you is, what is going on at Reality Labs right now?
So it's actually interesting. I think if Zuckerberg could go back or hit rewind a few years ago or something, and this is just me sort of speculating, but he probably would have tried to buy or at least made strong overtures to a company like Roblox or Fortnite, Epic Games, which owns Fortnite. And for a number of reasons, he didn't, probably because he didn't suspect he should do it. But then also, like, just an antitrust environment now is very different than it was 10, 15 years ago. So in the absence of buying that, and because he went down this sort of metaverse in his mind, and to get back to your initial point, their conception of the metaverse was like really focused on hardware. I think they've realized like that conception, this sort of Oculus based, now called Meta Quest thing, is not anywhere near where they want it to be, right, or anywhere
and maybe
near.
It never will be. It's impossible to say at this point.
Exactly. Yeah. Like that. It's not where they want to be now, basically. So what they're chasing inside now is trying to restart from a mobile perspective, which is how a lot of people use Fortnite and Roblox and these other platforms, which I would argue is like a real more solid conception of the metaverse, like this idea where you're playing across phones or desktops or whatever, and you can be John McClane in Die Hard fighting Lady Gaga in like a crazy level or something. Like that's a more realistic, that's a conception of the metaverse that is actually happening right now, where people are using it. And so that's what they're kind of focusing on. How do we build the architecture? They're sort of working on a new engine, I believe, to like, it's not going to be Horizon necessarily. I think it's, or it might be Horizon. I can't remember, but like,
well, I know that they rebuilt Horizon Worlds in Horizon Engine because it used to be built on top of Unity, right?
That's right. And they moved from Unity. That's exactly right. And so they're moving to basically what's going to work on phones in a better way than, because, and this is like a move that they probably should have done years ago, you know, when they saw that the headset thing wasn't working out. So I think that is what that division's kind of working on. And then meanwhile, their happy accident, we don't have to go down this hole, but their happy accident was the glasses and AR actually taking off, Meta Ray-Bans. And so they're pouring a ton of money into that now, basically. That's like their hardware play.
The sense that I get is that Zuckerberg himself and a lot of the other people who were high up, especially Andrew Bosworth, were so starstruck by the idea of this ultra futuristic thing that they lost track of the potential profitability of a much more prosaic implementation of this stuff. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I really do think that they love tech for tech's sake in some ways. They love Snow Crash, Ready Player One. There's a famous story, I think it was reported on at the time, but like Mark Zuckerberg read Ready Player One 15 years ago or whatever and was like proselytizing around the office. Everyone has to read a copy of this, like was very happy to talk about it. And it's funny that like often some of the themes of these books are lost on the people who love them so much.
Yeah, you're not supposed to do the plot of Snow Crash, guys. That's not the idea.
Right. They love sci-fi. I just don't think they take away, you could go like death of the author argument here, but I just think they take away something different. They read a lot of this stuff or absorb a lot of these things and are excited about it rather than go to a dark place, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Some of the stuff that really interested me actually about Reality Labs was some of the like pure tech stuff. There's that one video from one of the years of MetaConnect where in like the back quarter or so, that this is the infamous keynote, the one where he starts by going, "Hey." And
I remember that.
And you got the 3D bottle of Sweet Baby Ray's on the shelf and all that or whatever.
I remember this.
In the back quarter, though, some of the stuff that they show is like new gesture interfaces that they are working on and other big picture blue sky thinking, where my initial impulse was like, some of this could be genuinely revolutionary for like accessibility. People who are not able to maybe use their legs, use their arms, whatever. Like these are things that could have genuine positive use cases, but it also doesn't seem like those use cases are something they're interested in either.
That's I love the accessibility point. I do think this is the sort of like weird tragedy of a lot of this is like some of the tech they're working on really is very advanced and interesting. You know, like there are a few places in the world that you can get the funding and ability and space to just do some of this stuff. And I do think they had, you know, for all the criticisms of Meta, and you can have a lot, like they had a lot of very smart people working on some very hard problems, you know, whether that effort was expended in the right place. I imagine there are a lot of people that don't think that's like the outcome is great, but exactly what you said, like gesture based, like recognition, or, they are able to do. I actually remember testing, there was a press briefing that we were all a part of. It was during the lockdowns, and it was for testing the Horizon workspace thing, where basically their whole thing was put on the Meta headset and you're going to work or whatever. And I put it on, and Andrew Bosworth was seated right next to me quote unquote seated right next to me. And they had this sort of like presence thing where if you were speaking loudly, everyone in the room could hear you. But if you were just like sort of whispering to your side, like you and I were at a meeting, you could also only hear that. And so I leaned over and kind of did that. And it was like it was very impressive. It was like he and I were just whispering to each other in the same room. And I was like, how the fuck did you do this? But like, I agree with you. It's like the ultimate goal for them was just not aligned with what actual humans wanted. And also, it's sort of like they were out of alignment with what Meta wanted, which was control over this platform versus like maybe building interesting stuff for people,
Well, and something I'm wondering about is, do you know at this time if that bleeding edge stuff is still part of what Reality Labs is up to, or have they largely shifted to being more boring, for lack of a better way of putting it?
I think boring is often like the most lucrative thing.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, by boring, I mean valuable for shareholders.
Totally, 100%. And this is the thing. Like, I think they're starting to sort of appreciate that more now, basically. Like, how do we rely on things that, or here's the story. Here's a good example. The story they've been telling for the past few quarters on their earnings calls have been, look, we're spending a shitload of money on AI, but here's how it's improving all of our ad targeting models and Reels delivery. And like, look, like if the numbers that they're saying are right, like it is actually refining ad targeting. Like they're squeezing margins that seemed pretty maxed out. They're getting way more recommendations. People are coming back, and the ads they're getting are more valuable. So that's like boring, but helpful.
Although it's Facebook, and we do kind of know about their track record as regards analytics and their tendency to massage analytics, to put it diplomatically.
I mean, that's like, yes, you got to be careful there. So, but I think this is the where I never underestimate how they know how to play the street, because the street is giving them a lot of rope to hang themselves, meaning their stock has still been going up even as they've been spending an insane amount of money, right?
This actually takes me right into the next thing that I was wondering about, which is, in case you don't know already, you being the listener, obviously I know you know this, Mike, Facebook has a unique dual class share structure that largely exists so that Mark Zuckerberg can retain majority shareholder voting power, even if he sells his shares, gets diluted, whatever. And the net effect of this is that he holds somewhere between 55 to 60% of controlling interest of Facebook. Therefore, other shareholders cannot remove him, at least not through conventional means. And to talk a little bit about the stock price, Meta shares bottomed out in late 2022. That was after a couple years of being full steam ahead on the metaverse. The price was around $100 a share, which was a 7-year low. And this prompted Zuck to basically refocus the business and announce a major wave of layoffs. And since then, the stock price actually went on a complete heater for the next 3 years. It nearly octupled in value. But since last August, so for about a year now, the share price has stagnated. And it's not clear if the May layoffs, are actually moving the needle or not. And so my question is, what is investor sentiment right now? And how could they pressure Zuck if they wanted to?
So your dual class share structure thing is so important, because basically after the founders of Google decided to do this dual class share structure when they went public, which was on the advice of Warren Buffett, everyone sort of emulated that. Mark did too, which basically means no one can tell them what to do, and they can't be voted out of their own company. So I think during the metaverse, Wall Street was patient because the line was often, Facebook is still printing money through ads. Instagram is still printing money through ads. WhatsApp hasn't even been monetized yet, and it's a monster. It's like half the world uses this like messaging app. So Mark can go on this dalliance that hasn't necessarily been fully explained if it's going to work. We don't fully believe it, but whatever, because the business is sound, blah, blah, blah. Like they basically were like, the stock still has room to grow because there's all these other levers they can push, push and pull. Now, Mark trades metaverse. He's basically told the street we're ditching metaverse development, at least in the implementation, but now our capital expenditures is going to be enormous because AI is even more expensive, and they're going from tens of billions to, I think, projected this year and next year is like 150 billion in capex, which is insane. Like every company is spending, every big hyperscaler is spending that. So I think the reason that the stock isn't tanking because of what we were talking about before. They're still saying, here's the boring story. Our ads are doing better because of this AI, blah, blah, blah. But the story that Mark is telling of how AI is going to work with Meta's existing apps or with these Meta Ray-Ban glasses, which is another thing that people are actually buying, is like so muddled. Like his point that he keeps making is, well, we're going to bake AI into the glasses and it's going to be your personal assistant. And we're also going to have it inside of Facebook. He hasn't developed a proper narrative to tie it all together. And I'm not sure, frankly, if he has that proper narrative, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he seems to me to be the kind of guy who just really likes a cool toy. And that's maybe why he's gone all in on the glasses, because I would say those have maybe met with some success. People are actually buying them, and that's something. But at the same time, a lot of people are really pissed off because you walk around with these glasses that can photograph or record anything around you at any time. And that is a potential tremendous violation of everyone's privacy and pisses people off for the same reason that Google Glass pissed so many people off like a decade ago or whatever.
That's exactly right. And this was the glasses had a honeymoon period, I think, in the initial time where they had not saturated public consciousness to a huge degree, I would say. But like there were enough people buying them that Facebook was like, whoa, this is working, and then leaned all the way into it. And now I think there are enough out there and enough examples of like pervasive influencer videos where it's creepy or, the societal consequences of having cameras on your face that are not immediately detectable are actually leaking out there because there are enough of them out there for people to care, like it's now you can kind of reckon with it. So I think you're exactly right. They're probably going to go through this period of, well, it's a modest success, I would also say. Like in terms of Facebook scale, selling like 20 million pairs is not a lot compared to the rest of their business. But now they have the baggage of being the surveillance company already. And now people are like, oh, camera glasses. So I think it's going to be really difficult to reckon with now.
Yeah, it strikes me that going back to the point of the narrative of Facebook has always been from as soon as they started to try to monetize the product itself, the very first time they tried to do that, they are creepy. They are creepy and they do not value your privacy in any meaningful way. And frankly, I can't disagree.
No, I think that's right. I think they push the boundaries. It kind of goes back to our earlier point. Like it assumes down the line, people are going to be okay with this, or people are going to get used to this level of encroachment on, whether it's cookie tracking or how we know what your preferences are, or soon like where you are in the world or how cameras perceive you, having cameras everywhere. I would say in some degrees they're right, but also they forced it to make themselves right, because they just continue to push it forward, and they'll like back off every now and then when people get too mad or they get enough bad headlines. Like the most recent example being people being automatically opted into Instagram to your photos and videos.
That was an insane own goal. I could not believe that.
Yes, and then they had to backtrack because everyone was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" Like that's crazy, But ultimately, I think they see that as a cost of doing business. Like, all right, like eventually we're going to get to people who don't care. So whatever, we'll get there later.
Well, that was like in our episode most recently about the metaverse, we talked about that infamous Andrew Bosworth memo where he said all of the things that we are doing are for the sake of connecting more people. And this is just how it has to be. I don't think that I've ever seen the corporate philosophy of Meta laid out more plainly and more accurately than that memo, although it's very funny then that both Zuck and Boz went out to be like, actually, that's not, but Boz being like, I didn't believe it when I wrote it. What are you talking about, dude? Come on.
They had to do some backtracking there. I think, I also think that was like a period where it was a different period in Facebook history where it was somewhat less leaky. I will say like 2017, 2018 was a real inflection point because of it was the moment where post-Trump, the questions were, did Facebook do this to us?
Cambridge Analytica.
Cambridge, like all this sort of stuff that people weren't necessarily asking themselves about social media necessarily before. And it became more porous it certainly unlocked a lot of people for me in terms of sourcing,
I remember Facebook was for a long time seen as not just a good employer, but like the best employer that could ever possibly exist. That there was a loyalty that everybody had to the company and to the mission. I think that the book Careless People really does a good job of showing what that mindset does to a person and the extent to which they are willing to sacrifice their own self-interest for the sake of the company. But now, especially with this latest wave of layoffs, it sounds to me like the internal temperature at the company is about as hot as it could possibly be. Employees are fucking pissed. I'm curious what you think will be the net effect of this on Facebook as a company, or on Meta as a company, I should say, over the course of the next few years.
I totally agree with you. And I'm getting inbound. It's funny. Over the past, let's say 10 years, they've gone through different tumultuous periods. And I think the real big tumult for them was 2022, 2023 with the big layoffs then. But even before that, around Trump's election, Cambridge Analytica, stuff like that, they had a lot of leaks. But this is, I think, I've talked to even execs there who are like, this is the worst I've ever seen it. People are really upset. And I think it is far more of a mercenary culture inside than it ever has been. And I also think perhaps that's part of a class of these companies maturing. To your point, like Web 2.0 era, it was like Google, Facebook, Twitter to some degree. Like those were youngish back then. Now they're 20 plus year old companies.
Yeah,
right?
They're chopped.
They're fully chopped. They're not the hot startups anymore. They're where you go when you don't want to work as hard necessarily. But it's sort of this, can you ever not become HP or IBM or whatever? Like, is that just like part of corporate history and how it works, So like they're in this period now where they're cutting people really brutally. Some of the reorgs around AI have been really messy. They've even had to apologize on how it's gone. They did this weird acqui-hire of Alex Wang's company Scale AI and this like weird sort of spun out AI division that they're trying to make work. So I just think whether or not they come out ahead in any of this, it's a really brutal time for them. And I don't think that sense of loyalty that you were talking about earlier exists certainly not at a company-wide level, but it's a vanishingly smaller number of maybe long-timers or true believers.
Is it factionalized where people will sort of be like, I will protect this chunk of my turf? Because I know that's often how it gets in these situations.
Yeah. I was just talking to a guy this morning about how just like corporate politics, that's exactly it. And I think in any company of enough size, and certainly happening at Meta, is just corporate politics and incentives end up skewing development of a technology or a product, or here are my deliverable numbers, and so I'm going to work towards that goal rather than something that might be, it's self-interest, right? Like right. At the expense of a larger organization, I need to look out for myself to get to director level or something.
And also in terms of like doing the potentially bigger picture, like I'm going to do this not because I'm told to do it, because I think it would be interesting. That sort of thing doesn't tend to happen in environments like this because tall poppies get cut down.
Totally. Oh my God, totally. And I think that's how people think. And you have to, I don't know. This is the good question of, can a big enough company it's kind of like Clay Christensen's sort of innovator's dilemma thing. Do you rest on your laurels? I think Mark actually is well aware of this and is worried about getting out innovated all the time, but his answer is usually to just crush someone by copying them outright, or used to be buying them. But I don't know. That also doesn't always work,
And when it comes to buying, it's a little too late now as regards the current bubble, which is to say AI.
Totally.
One thing I'm curious about here is, I haven't heard anything about Llama in like 2 years. That's Facebook's LLM. And it seems to be, they also couldn't really find a useful implementation for it in their own products. Like you can have Facebook summarize a post that you just read for some reason. Like it doesn't seem like they've been able to find utility or customers for Llama. And last week, you actually reported with your colleague Eli Tan that Meta is currently in talks to lease compute capacity to Anthropic. And of course, Anthropic, OpenAI, they're both going to be going public probably sooner than later. That is the next big thing. And the amount that you reported is that it could be for as much as $10 billion. Is this a tacit acknowledgement that they have already lost the battle?
So I think there's a few ways you could probably read it. Like the bull case for them, and this is probably what people inside of Meta would say, is we are building our data center footprint out, and we're potentially overbuilding. So we build faster than we have the demand for our computing power on our own services. So in preparation for a future in which we have that demand, we might as well rent out our compute in the meantime, and then we kill that contract when we need it. That's the bull case.
That's all well and good, but to me, it just sounds like IBM, to the point that you were making earlier.
Yeah, the bear case is, look, you're throwing in the towel and you built all this stuff and no one wants to use your shit, so we might as well get some money for it and like sell it. And like if they want to be what's called a neo cloud, like the idea that you own all these data centers and you aren't AWS and you aren't Microsoft Azure, you're more like a Databricks or one of these companies that just is sitting on a bunch of servers and can rent them out. That's a perfectly fine business to be in, especially these days, right? If the party's still going in AI compute land, but it's not what you set out to be. No. And perhaps that's not what they end up being.
What do you think is going to end up happening? Is it too early to say?
I do think it's too early, but I also don't see a ton of positive signs for a lot of their AI initiatives working, right? Like I'm still waiting for the quote unquote killer app that they have for their AI stuff. And you see kind of what you were saying, that you see them kind of floundering and like, oh, you could use it for this. They're kind of told from the top down, figure out how to use this technology in our products. And then you get a lot of really bad examples until something works or it doesn't.
Which was actually the exact same problem with Meta Horizon and Horizon Worlds. There were no good worlds.
Yes, that's exactly. That's kind of the epitaph of the metaverse in a lot of ways for Meta, which is just like a solution in search of a problem. And I think that goes back to, we love building the tech, but we need to figure out a use case later on.
Well, one thing that you also have reported on recently that is a piece of tech that does have a very obvious use case is that Meta apparently is building a prediction markets app.
Yeah.
I read this story and I was like, they have completely lost the fucking plot. What is going on here?
Mark is I was saying to an editor, is like, Mark is a astute student of human behavior on the internet. And I think he just sees where people are going a lot of the time and sees what they're doing online and says, I need this. I need to capture this behavior. This is what we like. If this is the direction people are headed, and some would argue really at the cost of having like a moral compass around this, like you would say, do you want this behavior?
That's the thing. It's like, it's definitely not wrong to be like, this is where people are going, but it has absolutely nothing to do with Meta's stated mission to connect people.
That was the interesting thing reading this. I got an internal post from the VP in charge of it that sort of was like post hoc explaining why they're doing it, sort of thing. And it really felt like it was reaching. It was like betting as conversation. And I was like, really? I don't know.
Come on. Is this a product that they're going to be trying to move into the market, or is it still unclear at this time? Are they going to keep it internal for a bit?
I mean, I'm curious. I feel like they are just going to do it. I'm curious if our story ended up messing with anything. As far as I could tell, they were still testing when we published. So it's unclear to me what the timeline is for this going out. They were what's called dog fooding, like letting their own employees do it, but use it. But like as far as I'm aware, this is destined for the public at some point. They'll probably do it carefully and say, "Oh, we're testing it out. We want to see if people are interested in it."
What does all of this tell us right now about where Mark Zuckerberg is? Because at the end of the day, Meta is a company that reflects him, not just his vision, but him as a person, I would argue. And I'm curious what you see that state looking like right now, given your reporting.
I mean, I think you're exactly right that you need to look at his company as a reflection of him. I think he and his company are just inextricable, together. I think they're going to pry him out of that chair, and nowhere near soon. I think he is sweating. I think he missed a number of really important technological waves. I think it's fair to poke holes in what AI is going to be and should be, and whether society is ready for it or wants it at all, or what form it comes in. But even if you believe that AI is really here to stay and is going to be everywhere, Meta missed that boat. And so Mark has spent the past few years trying to figure out how to be on that cutting edge. And look, I don't know, think of all the big whether you think they're good or bad, think of all the big sort of online behaviors and technological advances of the past few years. And not many of them have come out of Meta, at least as far as things that have caught on widely. Even if you hate prediction markets, that it doesn't matter. That still didn't come out of Meta. Like, they are not the ones putting that out there. If you hate crypto, doesn't matter, and that went nowhere, but it was like a thing, and that also didn't come out of Meta. I think this notion that he still worries about everyone else but him being able to just predict the future is really something that bothers him. And so he makes up for that with sort of grinding it out, coming in really hot and heavy and saying, all right, then we're just going to fucking stomp all over you and do it bigger, because they rely on their scale at the end of the day. But I'm just curious how long that can work. I think he kind of wonders how long that can work, but in the meantime is just going to kind of hit it hard. And I don't see him resting on his laurels anytime soon, is what I would say.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Everybody go read Mike's articles in the New York Times. You can also follow him on Instagram at Mike_Isaac, on Blue Sky at MikeIsaac.bsky.social. And make sure to go out and get a copy of his book, Super Pumped, The Battle for Uber, available wherever fine books are sold. And if you, dear listener, are listening to our show for the first time, thanks for this interview, well, we're happy you're here. If you'd like to hear more of our stuff, every week we do case studies in the pop culture of a dying empire. And one of our topics of continued fascination has been Facebook. We release new episodes every week, and every other week's episode we release exclusively for our Patreon subscribers at patreon.com/worstofall. If you're interested in hearing more about our history with Facebook, definitely go check out our episode about the social network. That's a free one. And then if you really like what you hear, we also have Patreon episodes about Shrimp Jesus and the death of Facebook, sort of covering the demise of Facebook as a platform at the hands of generative AI, as well as, of course, the subject that we've been talking about a little bit today, which is the death of Horizon Worlds, Meta's VR metaverse platform. So for all that and more, check the links down in the episode notes. I'm the worst of all possible Joshes, and we'll see you Wednesday for our next regular episode about the amazing digital circus.